It's no secret that this expansion is focusing on Piltover and Zon, Shurima, and Bilgewater as the regions, because those are the regions accompanying the new champions that we're getting. But with that being said, we got a bunch of new reveals today that I'm excited to talk about. If you're wondering, yes, you cannot see my face if you didn't watch my Pike video from earlier today. My cat kind of messed up my lighting and I haven't had a chance to fix it yet, and I wanted to do my recordings first. So you don't get to see me today, but we're still going to cover the cards, starting with Boom Baboon. This is a 2-cost 3/1 from Piltover and Zon. When I'm summoned, create a Flame Chompers in hand. This card also has the art of a monkey riding a rocket, which is the best part of the card, hands down. Number 1 card revealed today by far, because it's a monkey riding a rocket. But outside of that, you know, jokes aside, this card is interesting because you might want to consider running it in discard aggro. It is an enabler. The problem is I'm not sure that a 2-cost 3/1 is good enough to run in discard aggro, because those early turns matter a lot and your mana is tight, and you would rather, I think, be developing something like an arena battlecaster or something like that. I don't know. This one is, I think, going to take some testing, but I don't think that discard aggro wants too many of these, even if it does end up running it. The Flame Chompers is obviously a nice to have, and the 3/1 body isn't terrible, but I'm not sure that it's enough to crack discard aggro. That's one of those decks that's been around since like the beginning of the game, and it's very refined at this point, so it's difficult for new stuff to crack that lineup. Like, the card has to be kind of busted to fit into discard aggro at this point, because everybody knows how to play that deck and what belongs in it. So I don't know, but I will say that I like Boom Baboon potentially in some niche decks. So for example, I think about like Teemo and Shadow Isles, those burn style decks, specifically ones that also run like Prankster, because it's giving you potentially another free body, and you might run like a sub discard package there, or it might give you just something you can pitch to get excited in those burn decks. It is also a nice rummage enabler, and there's a couple of decks that might want to run rummage but doesn't really want to run, say, the bot, because the ignitions are too slow, and usually decks that want to run ballistic bot are a bit more mid-range centric or combo oriented, and you're going to take some time to set up your combo and then kind of pop off, or you want to be able to take advantage of the ignition. Maybe you're a spell heavy deck, but not every deck wants to do that. And so just having an option, just having something that exists that maybe allows you to create cards that you can then pitch, still get value from rummage, still do these other things, I think is relevant. So Boom Baboon is nice in that it provides you options, and there are some niche decks that might want to run it, and I think I'll at least test it in discard aggro, but it's even still, it probably won't be a 3 of, but we get a monkey riding a rocket, and that's the real story here. All right, next up we have Glorious Evolution. Yes, the name and the art obviously imply this is meant to be played with Viktor. This is a 10-cost slow spell, and so that is the drawback. But there's a lot going on here, starting with the opening text is replace your cards everywhere with exact copies of themselves, which might be the coolest sentence ever written for a card game, because it's just so hilarious to me. Replace your cards everywhere with exact copies of themselves, but it's relevant. That's what's funny here. Now it also says they have -1 cost, augment, and are now tech. So first, let's talk about the negatives. This is a 10-cost slow spell. The earliest you're likely playing this is round 7 with full banked spell mana, and that means you took your whole turn off, and that's bad. That's not the sort of thing that you can usually do and get away with. Even if you decide to play it later, now we're talking very, very late game. So this is the kind of card that needs to set up some big payoffs. Now, here's the positive. in a Viktor style control deck, I think this could actually warrant a big payoff. Because it replaces your cards everywhere with exact copies of themselves, that means that every card you play from then on out will contribute to leveling up Viktor, because they are created cards, because they're copies. They are not the original cards. They are created cards. They're also going to be cheaper. So again, the -1 cost, very relevant. If Viktor is on the board and leveled up, everything is now -2 cost, because he gives cost reduction, and then Evolution gave a cost reduction. So the cost reduction is nice. If you've got a fair number of 1 cost cards, even if you play this on round 7 with your full banked spell mana, you could still potentially play some additional 1 cost cards. So that's not terrible either. The later you go in the game, though, I think the better off you are. I think this is actually the sort of card you want to be playing when you have, you know, closer to like 13 full mana. Like, I think this is a round 10 play, and you want stuff on the board. Because for me, the real story here is not the tech piece, though I like that. Making everything tech means you also have a nice Heimerdinger tie-in. But the real thing for me is augment. It gives all of your cards everywhere augment. So that includes units on the board. So if you've got 2 or 3 units on the board and now they suddenly have augment, you can go into an attack and the math gets crazy, because every card you play from here on out is a created card, and they're all cheaper as well. So you can start playing like Mystic Shot for 1, deal some damage, but also all of your units are going to get that bonus to their power because of augment. And so with some burst spells or some cheap fast spells, you can really mess up the combat math for some people. And I think that's the real benefit of the card. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to be good enough to see competitive play, but I do think that it is unique enough and fun enough that I will certainly experiment with it and make some memes around it. And I do think that it is better than we're giving it credit for. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's good, but I think it's better than we're giving it credit for, because making everything have augment really messes with combat math for your opponent, and I love that. So I plan on messing around with it a little bit. Next up, we have Shifting Sands. This is a 6-cost slow spell in Shurima. It says deal 4 to a unit, summon 2 sand soldiers. I think this is a great expedition card. I think this has pretty strong potential in decks that are not Azir Aurelia but still want to run Azir, because the sand soldiers are nice and the deal 4 to a unit is relevant. I think about when Azir first came out and I was trying all of the different cool ways to pair Azir with wacky combos. I'm talking, you know, Von Yip Azir decks and Jagged Taskmaster Azir decks, and, you know, running the card that buffed your sand soldiers. This card would have been great during those days, the pre-Blade Dance days, back when Azir was the sort of card that you ran in multiple different archetypes. So in that respect, I like this card because it's very nostalgic, but we're already to the point where I think this is probably just not good enough. It is a 6-cost slow spell with controlling elements, and the sand soldiers are like a nice to have. I mean, I think it's actually a really good defensive card. That being said, non-Azir decks that are Shurima control theoretically could see a lot of benefit from this card, because you could just use the bodies. They are disposable bodies. Dealing 4 to a unit, if your opponent doesn't open attack, dealing 4 to a unit and giving yourself 2 free chump blockers, very relevant. Like, that's a powerful effect in and of itself. Similarly, if Thresh Nasus wasn't so fine-tuned already, this card has potential in a deck like that, where again you get removal and then you have sand soldiers that you could turn into Ravenous Butchers or whatever. So the card isn't terrible, and defensively I actually think it has a lot of power. I just don't know that it's going to be good enough to find a home being a 6-cost slow spell, because even really powerful 6-cost slow spells barely see play. I'm thinking about like the Targon one that silences a unit and nukes it. Not saying it doesn't see play, but it's usually like as a one of, and it's in, you know, a limited number of decks. So I think Shifting Sands is cool, and I like that it exists, but I don't know where it's going to find a home. Next up, we have Treasure Seeker. This is a 1-cost 2/1 in Shurima. When I'm summoned, create a Waking Sands in hand. Now, if you do not remember, Waking Sands is the 2-cost slow spell that makes a Sandstone Charger, which is the 5/2 ephemeral unit. I think this card is cheeky fun for like expeditions. I think theoretically this is fine in reputation decks, because while it's just a 2/1, it gives you a way to create a 5/2 that will likely strike something. It'll get chump blocked, like, let's be honest, but it's a 5/2, and that's relevant for helping drive up your reputation count. So maybe something like this finds a home in like a Sivir deck at some point, but this isn't exactly the sort of card that wows you, but it's not terrible. Next up, we have The Time Has Come. This is a 5-cost burst spell from Shurima, and you summon a Clockling. And then if you have predicted this game, you summon 2 instead. Now, Clockling is the 2/2 unit that Ancient Preparations summons. So don't get excited. This is not the one where you reduce your countdown. This is just flat out a 2/2 body. So unless we get more cards that interact with Clocklings, really this is just trying to create units at burst speed, which is not terrible. There's a lot you can do with that, whether that's setting up open attacks or creating surprise blockers. It's not going to be as powerful as something like Risen Mists, though, because the Clocklings are not scaling. And I think that the, you know, if you've predicted is very easy to accomplish. So I think this is essentially always a 5-cost burst spell to summon 2/2/2s. My biggest issue here is I just don't know what deck wants to run it. Like, I think it's actually a pretty powerful effect. Burst speed unit generation has historically been pretty good. I just don't know what deck wants to run it, specifically like in Shurima that it has also predicted. If I had to pick a place where I want to run it, it's actually in Mono Shurima. I think in Mono Shurima, being able to burst create blockers as you're trying to stall until you can create your Sun Disk is very relevant. Obviously, you're running a number of predict cards in that deck as well, so that you can try to find your combo pieces. The fact that it's making 2 units means you're getting that much closer to leveling Azir, and in that deck, when you're not dedicating a ton of time to unit generation, something like this is far more beneficial. So I think Mono Shurima actually is the best home for this, but outside of that, it's just really difficult to figure out where this has a home. Okay, so we still have more cards to cover, and we're going to move on to Reaver's Row. This is a 5-cost landmark from Bilgewater, and it says, when I count down, summon a random 1-cost follower. Countdown of 2, grant 1-cost allies +2/+1 and fearsome. And I love this card for a number of reasons, but I also question if it's going to be good enough, which makes me a little sad. So I love this card because I'm the kind of wacky person that loves trying to make Von Yip work, but my biggest issue with Von Yip is that he's so expensive for such a small body. I really think he needs to be at least like a 2/4. And this card, being a 5-cost card, is a little bit slower than Von Yip, which is part of the problem. Now, it's more resilient being a landmark, so that's great. And I love that it's hitting all of your allies. That makes it very relevant. But the issue that I have with this card is that you need your 1-cost cards to survive. And they're very prone to dying to things like Blighted Ravine and Avalanche. And if you're playing a Reaver's Row deck, your opponents are going to know kind of what's coming or what to expect. So trying to create a situation where, like, on 4, you play a bunch of 1 costs, and then on the next round you play Reaver's Row to try to set up your open attack on 6, they're going to have that window where they're like, okay, we know what's coming, and they're going to play Ravine, or they're going to Avalanche, or Withering Wail, or whatever it is, and you're going to get a lot less value. But with that being said, this is a really powerful effect because it hits your whole board, and you don't need a ton of 1-drops to really get some value. Like, for example, if you're trying to set up that open attack on 6, even if you only have like 2 Jagged Butchers, let's say you've triggered Jagged Butcher, right? You got 2 of them, so you got 2 3/3 1-drops. Reaver's Row triggers, they jump to 5/4 fearsomes. You get another random 1 cost follower. It gets +2 +0 or +1 in fearsome. That's an okay board for an open attack on 6. Like, that's not terrible. So I do think that this card has a lot of potential. I think it's a very powerful effect. I think there's a number of ways to create 1 cost units that are relevant, especially in Bilgewater, right? You've got numbers of ways to create them, not just the spells, right? But I'm thinking about existing units. Officer, the scout unit. I think that Reaver's Row has the support. You just have to make sure that your units survive. And on that round 5, you have to remember, like, you're not doing anything else. It's just Reaver's Row. So I think that's the drawback here. This is a risk reward card. I think the rewards are going to be great. It's just figuring out the timing for when to play it and have it be successful. But I do like the card because I love that archetype. I love playing like Jagged Taskmasters and things like that because it's kind of fun to take things that are, you know, small costed, kind of undervalued, and then making them be super scary and relevant. Next up, we have Line 'em Up, which is paired with Knock 'em Down. And I love this card. So Line 'em Up is a 2-cost Bilgewater spell that says summon a powder keg, create Knock 'em Down in hand. Knock 'em Down is a 1-cost fleeting slow spell, but it deals 1 to anything. So the pessimist might say this is a really bad Mystic Shot because you're paying 3 total to deal 2 to anything, and you're basically doing it at slow speed instead of fast speed. And you're not wrong. But 1, Mystic Shot's like still good enough to see play all the time. So a bad Mystic Shot might still be good enough to see play in Bilgewater, who needs a lot of help. But for me, the real story is this is burst speed powder keg creation. As somebody who's played a lot of keg control, as somebody who's played a lot of Dreadway decks, that is what I'm excited about. Being able to mess with your opponent's head in terms of combat math, and, you know, save that 7 mana. You're playing Shadow Isles Keg Control, for example. You got 7 mana. Your opponent's now saying, all right, did they save that 7 mana for a vengeance, or are they going to do 2 to my entire board? Are they about to line them up and then hit me with the Withering Wail? Who knows? Line them up makes cards like Make It Rain far more viable. There are a number of uses. I love burst speed keg creation. I'm really excited for this card. Cannot wait to test it. But the card that most people are excited about is the next one. So Volunteer Elnuk is a 3-cost 3/4 in Piltover and Zaun. Now it says when I'm summoned, create a random Elnuk in the top 6 cards of your deck. So this card is meant to be a troop of Elnuks fuel generator, while also being an Elnuk itself for troop of Elnuks. Longtime players are going to remember the old like Frost Ezreal Elnuk deck, which was a terror for a time on the ladder because it would just sometimes accidentally win on round 5. And so seeing this card is bringing back those memories. I will say this card is actually pretty good because a 3-cost 3/4 is fine for stats, but also it's a 3-cost Piltover and Zaun card. So if you were already considering playing an Elnuk Ezreal deck, you were probably running Tri-Beam already because you're running cards like Flash Freeze, you're running cards like Ezreal, and this is another 3-cost card that fits into the deck, so it's fueling your Tri-Beam. And It's got a relevant summon effect, and most modern versions of the quote-unquote Elnuk list were also running concurrent timelines, because you can play Troop. Troop still summons any existing Elnuks from your deck, but then Troop transforms into another 5-drop, which is probably just better than base Troop. But this having its own summon effect could do the same thing for you. So this could create more Elnuks in the top 6 cards of your deck to set up a future Troop. And if you've already played concurrent timelines, then you just transform this into a different 3-drop. Not that the 3-cost 3/4 isn't fine, but this again works with timelines, works with Elnuks, works with Tri-Beam. So this card is such a cool addition and such a fun combo piece. So with that being said, I don't know that that deck's going to be good enough to suddenly like sweep through the meta, right? Let's set realistic expectations here. But in the first week of the expansion, you should absolutely be prepared to see Volunteer Elnuk, because I expect that deck to be popular amongst longtime players, because I've seen it all on my Twitter line already. Everybody's saying Elnuks back. Oh my God, there's a new Elnuk. It's created a lot of buzz and excitement for players who've been around for quite a bit. And as such, at least during that first week, while people are having fun, experimenting, getting stuff out of their system, you should expect to see this at least a couple of times. I mean, obviously, expect to see Lurk. That's kind of like the marquee new deck, but also don't be surprised if you see some Elnuks day 1, day 2, etc. So that's it for the reveals. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Thank you for listening to my rant. As always, I love you all. I want to hear from you what you think of the new reveals. Which ones are you most excited about? Are you going to build the Elnuk deck? Let me hear all about it. And until next time, may you walk on warm sands.